Hello, everyone. Welcome to Human Biology. This is Chapter 4. This chapter is going to focus on the organization of the human body, but also how systems or how the body responds to its environment. Also, we're going to take a look at the different organ systems in the body. Now, as we address this chapter, I would like you to focus on a number of questions. First question is basically as we looked at cells, cells are going to come together to form a tissue. What is a tissue? What are organs? What are organ systems? The next questions I would like you to focus on is what are the different types of tissues that are found in the body? We are going to address the four major types of tissues. What does these tissues look like? Where are they found? How do they function? What are some structures that are found making up these tissues? And then we are going to dive into the first system of this course, the integumentary system. What is the integumentary system? What does it do? What is it made up of? Right? And finally, we are going to take a look at some defects that can happen on the skin and particularly skin cancer. We're going to define skin cancer and we are going to take a look at what we can do to prevent skin cancer. And finally, but not least, what is the role of the integumentary system in maintaining a relatively internal balance in our body? And when we talk about internal balance in our body, well, what is it? What is homeostasis? And how is it maintained? So we are going to define that concept in a general term, but then we're also going to take the very specific example of the skin as to how it participates in homeostasis. Now, with that said, first question, what are tissues? So how do we define a tissue? A tissue, it's a collection of cells that are similar and that are going to come together to work toward the same function. In the human body, we have a number of tissues, but really there are four major types of tissues. I expect you to know them. The first one, the connective tissues. The second one, the muscular tissues. The third one, the nervous tissues. And the fourth one, epithelial tissues. We are going to dive into each of the tissues. Now, first, the connective tissues. What is their role? Their role is basically based on what their name says, connective tissue. It's a very descriptive name. The connective tissues, they bind different parts of the body. They provide support of different parts of the body. Think, for instance, of your brain. Your brain sits in the skull, and the skull is that hard shell that protects the soft nervous tissue that is the brain, right? So it provide protection. It provide support in a sense also that you need to have access to nutrients. What is bringing nutrients to your cells inside of the body so you can grow and maintain a good health, right? We are going to see that there is, for instance, the blood that is responsible for carrying nutrients, right? And that function of carrying nutrients, it's very much a supportive function. Just to mention all of that. Now, connective tissues are going to all have some specialized cells. And at all time, we are going to ask, what is that specialized cell? In addition to specialized cells, connective tissues are going to have a ground substance. That ground substance is going to be the extracellular matrix in which cells are going to be found. In addition to that ground substance, we are going to have protein fibers. These protein fibers are going to determine tremendously the consistency of the connective tissue. Now, the ground substance, it's basically going to be made up of non-cellular part. Remember, I said the extracellular matrix, right? And that ground substance is going to, the consistency of it is going to vary between liquid, fluid, if you will, and solid. Some connective tissues are going to be solid, some are going to be fluid, and in between, right? The ground substance, it's going to be made up of protein fibers and carbohydrate and salts. So this ground substance and protein fibers together make up the matrix of the tissue. There are three major types of connective tissues. We have the fibrous connective tissues. We have the supportive connective tissue that provides support. And we have the fluid connective tissue that is fluid. Now, in the three different types of connective tissues, fibrous, supportive, and fluid, we can see that there are further divisions in the different types of connective tissues. For instance, the fibrous connective tissues are going to occur in two kinds. We have the loose connective tissue and we have the dense connective tissue. The loose connective tissue is going to have some cells and protein fibers, but the whole structure is not compact. That's what makes it loose, right? And then we are going to have the dense fibrous connective tissue. There, the cells and the protein fibers are going to be densely packed together, causing it to look dense, right? Then we are going to have the supportive connective tissues. In that group, we are going to have two kinds of supportive connective tissues. We are going to have the cartilage that is solid yet flexible, and the bones that are solid and rigid. By the way, that's why they can break, right? And then we have the fluid connective tissues. Among the fluid connective tissue, we're going to have two kinds. We're going to have the blood that is made up of two parts. You have the formed element, right, which are all the cellular components, and the non-cellular components are the proteins that are in the blood. And then we're going to have the lymph, right? The lymph is going to contain the lymphatic vessels and going to have the lymph fluid, right? Actually, the lymph is going to be contained, in lymphatic vessels. That's the way I should say this. Now, in the fibrous connective tissues, again, there are two kinds of fibrous connective tissue. we have the dense and the loose connective tissues. The specialized cells in these connective tissues are called fibroblasts. Okay, the fibroblast cells make up the specialized cells in here. I want you to remember that. Along with the fibroblast, you are going to have a matrix that is going to contain a huge amount of collagen and elastic fibers. Now, the collagen and elastic fibers are different in the sense that collagens are thick fibers. They are thick and that they are non-extensible. They are kind of like climbing ropes, right? The ropes you use to climb, you don't want them to be stretchy, right? Or else an accident can happen, right? While elastic fibers are very much what the name says. They are elastic. They can extend, right? They basically work like rubber bands, right? Then we have in the loose fibrous connective tissues, we're going to find them providing support to epithelia, and also is going to be found extensively in internal organs. Now, what are some examples of areas where you are going to find loose fibrous connective tissues? For instance, underneath the skin. Now, I don't know if you ever cooked chicken, but if you ever cook chicken, you are going to notice that between the skin of the chicken and the very muscle underneath the skin, you are going to have some kind of slimy layer that holds the two structures together, right? What I mean by the two structures together, I mean the skin and the muscles. So the connective tissue is going to sit in between. A type of adipose tissue I want you to remember, a type of loose connective tissue I want you to remember is the adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is made up of specialized cells that are called adipose cells or fat cells. This fat tissue is found throughout the body, but very much underneath of the skin. The subcutaneous layer is made up of fat. Now, if you consider, for instance, when we approach winter, if we were still living in the wild, underneath of our skin, we would have a growth in the amount of adipose tissue, while in the summer, that amount of adipose tissue would decrease underneath of the skin. You know, those who are hunting deers and who actually butcher deers can picture what I'm trying to say here, right? In the winter time, the amount of fat underneath of the skin increases in a deer, while in the summertime that amount decreases. The adipose tissues are also going to be found cushioning some organs, including the heart. Now, the loose connective tissue, what do they look like? Well, here you have a micrograph of loose connective tissue. You're going to have here the collagen fibers, and here elastic fibers. And you can see that elastic fibers are thin, collagen fibers are thick, right? You're going to have here a graphic representation of the tissue. We're going to have the fibroblast. It's one of the cells here, the fibroblast. Another fibroblast here, Okay, this is in a graphic representation, but in a micrograph, this is a fibroblast, this is another fibroblast, this is another fibroblast. Okay, but in tissues where, in organs where you're going to find loose connective tissue, the fibroblasts are not the only cells you are going to find. You are also going to find things like white blood cells, but these white blood cells are in circulation. They are not resident of that loose connective tissue. All right? The fibroblast here are the cells that manufacture all the extracellular matrix that is found making up that loose connective tissue. So all these collagen fibers are made by the fibroblast, right? The elastic fibers made by the fibroblast. There are some other fibers that are very thin. They are called the reticular fibers. They are much thinner than the elastic fibers. These reticular fibers are also made by the fibroblast. And all the matrix, it's actually made by the fibroblast. So you're going to have some examples of where you could find the loose connective tissue. Now, how about, I need to mention something. How about the dense connective tissue? The dense connective tissue is going to be found in places such as the tendons, right here, where the collagen fibers and elastic fibers are so tightly packed together, and the fibroblasts trapped in between, that so packed together that they're going to look dense. So you're going to find dense connective tissue in tendons, in tendons, and in ligaments. Ligaments. That's where you're going to find primarily dense fibrous connective tissue. All right. How about the supportive connective tissue? There are two kinds of supportive connective tissue. You're going to have the cartilage and you're going to have the bone. Our first stop, it's the cartilage. The cartilage is going to be that substance, that connective tissue that is solid yet flexible. I want you to remember that. Now, because this matrix is solid, the cells are going to actually be trapped in little chambers. These chambers are called lacunae. One lacuna, several lacunae, right? The specialized cells that are responsible for producing that matrix that causes the production of cartilage, these cells are called chondrocytes. Chondrocytes. Okay? Cells that make up the cartilage. Now, there are different types of cartilages. We have the hyaline cartilage. The hyaline cartilage is made up of fine collagen fibers, and it is found mainly in the nose, at the extremity of long bones, and making up the fetal skeleton. And you know that the fetal skeleton is going to be progressively replaced by bones as a fetus get close to being born, and from the time of birth, the process of replacing cartilage, hyaline cartilage, by bones is going to be accelerated. Let me close that parenthesis. Now, the second type of cartilage that we are going to find in the body is going to be elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage is going to be is going to have more elastic fibers than collagen fibers. And the matrix is going to be less hard than the hyaline cartilage. Now, if you consider the outer ear, you can literally twist the outer ear and leave it alone and it comes back to place. That speaks to how much elastic this cartilage is. Finally, we have the fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is very strong. It's going to be found in places where there is need for a cushion. For instance, between bones. If you consider your vertebral column, your vertebrae actually is going to have, your vertebrae are going to have a little cushion. That cushion prevents two contiguous vertebrae to not rub against each other. And when you jump and you land, your vertebrae are not crushing against each other because of the fibrocartilage. That fibrocartilage is very fibrous. It's thick and it's dense, right? So the discs that you find between the vertebrae are basically fibrocartilage. The next supportive tissue, it's the bones. The bones are solid and rigid, right? Because of that, the cells, the specialized cells, are also going to be in little chambers. These chambers are also called lacunae. Again, one lacuna, several lacunae, right? The specialized cells that are responsible for making the bone are osteocytes. These osteocytes are the ones that find themselves in these little chambers called lacunae, right? What makes the bone solid? It's the presence of large amount of collagen and salt. And in the bone, the major salt is going to be calcium, but also phosphate, right? Calcium phosphate. That's the major amount, the major type of salt that is found in the bones and that makes the bone solid. It's not the only salt, but that's the most abundant salt in the bone. Now, when we talk about the bone and we look at the bone, we see that there are two kinds of bones. We have the compact bone, very descriptive as name, right? That compact bone is made up of repeated circular units that are called osteons. These osteons are packed together, but in spite of the fact that this bone is very compact, this bone is still a living tissue. That is a very important piece to remember. It's still a living tissue. You are going to have blood vessels running through. Okay? You're going to have blood vessels running through. You are going to have nervous tissue running through. That's why when you break a bone, it hurts, right? The blood vessels are going to bring nutrients. Dot one. Two, they are also going to take the waste away. Where do we find compact bone? Typically, we're going to find compact bone at the shaft of long bones. If you consider, for instance, the femur as part of your leg, you consider the humerus as part of your arm, these are both long bones, right? So the shaft of these two bones, right, is going to be made up of compact bone. Then at the extremity of long bones, we are going to find a type of bone that we call the spongy bone. That spongy bone is made up of open lattices, right? And this these lattices are going to allow room for the bone marrow to sit in. And very specifically, at the extremity of long bones, you have the red bone marrow, right? So the spongy bone is found at the extremity of long bones, right? This is where the red bone marrow is going to be trapped. So here you have the spongy bone. You can see the spongy bone here, spongy bone here. Okay, well, you don't show it very well, but this is right here. You have some compact bone. All right, compact bone. Okay, so here you're going to have, this is some cartilage. You have a little chamber here called lacuna, and you're going to have the chondrocyte here, another chondrocyte here. All right, chondrocyte, another one here. Okay, so here we have not shown some osteocytes. All right. The next connective tissue we are going to address is the fluid connective tissue. Remember, we have the blood as fluid connective tissue, but we also have the lymph. The first step we're going to make is the blood. The blood, it's a type of fluid connective tissue. That fluid connective tissue has a matrix that is called plasma. The plasma is the non-cellular part of the blood. Now, obviously, if you have the plasma, that is the non-cellular part of the blood, you're going to have a cellular component of the blood. Now, that cellular component of the blood has a name. It is called formed element. That formed element is made up of, obviously, formed elements, right? Now, there are different formed elements or cellular component of the blood. The first we are going to mention is the red blood cells. Now, red blood cells carry a fancy name. That is the erythrocytes. Erythrocytes, I expect you to know that name. The job of erythrocytes in the body is to carry oxygen. Okay, they're going to have some proteins called hemoglobins. These hemoglobins are the one that are going to catch oxygen, and that way red blood cells are going to carry oxygen through the body. That's one. Two, other cellular component in formed elements is the white blood cell, also called leukocyte. I also expect you to know that. The leukocytes or white blood cells are responsible for fighting infections in your body. Whether you are fighting a viral infection or a bacterial infection or a parasitic infection, they all contribute in causing your body to be restored. Then the third component is the platelets. The platelets are also called thrombocytes. I expect you to know this. Thrombocytes are fragments of cells. Now, the cells that give rise to platelets are called megakaryocyte. Megakaryocytes. These are huge cells. These huge cells get fragmented into platelets. These platelets are going to be essential for blood clotting. That's their job. Here we have the components of the blood, including the white blood cells, the red blood cells, and the platelets. Again, white blood cells are leukocytes, red blood cells are erythrocytes, while platelets are thrombocytes. And in all of that, you are going to have a matrix that is the plasma. This is where all the cells are going to bath in. How about the lymph? The lymph, it's a fluid connective tissue that is really a derivative of the plasma. All right, it's a derivative of the plasma. And that lymph is going to house some white blood cells. And those white blood cells are going to be in the lymph to be carried and be stored in lymph nodes, right? In lymph nodes. This is where they are going to stay. Whenever there is an infection, these cells are going to leave the lymph nodes and start circulating in the body so they can go target infectious particles and get rid of the infection. Now, we are done with the connective tissues. Now we are going to look into the muscle tissues. There are three types of muscle tissues: the skeletal muscle, the smooth muscles, and the cardiac muscle. Regardless of the muscle tissue, the function is to provide movement in the body. And there are a number of proteins that are responsible for that function. These proteins are called actins and myosins, right? Actins and myosins are going to be found abundant. These are protein fibers. They're going to be found abundant in muscle cells regardless of the type of muscle cell. Now, the muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. When we talk about muscle fiber, we mean muscle cell, right? So, skeletal muscles made up of muscle fibers, smooth muscles, same thing, and cardiac muscles, same thing. Now, the skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscles are relatively long. The cells are long, cylindrical, and typically they're going to have multiple nuclei in one single cell. Now, this happens because skeletal muscle cells can merge, but they only merge when they are mature, right? And as they merge, well, the nuclei are not going to go away. They are going to stay in the huge cell that developed, right? These cells are going to be compacted, very compacted, and you are going to see a number of other structures. We're going to see striations. These striations are basically dark bands and light bands. We are going to see this when we look at the muscular system, right? But I'm not going to give you much more detail than that. Where do we find skeletal muscles and what do they do specifically? Skeletal muscles are going to be found typically attached to bones. They're going to be attached to bones to allow movement. This movement are going to be voluntary movement. You decide, for instance, to walk, right? The muscles in your leg, you control them. you decide, for instance, to move your arm to turn the page of a to turn the pages of your book, right? If you don't move your arm, I mean, you decide to do that motion, right? You decide to move your finger, right? These are all skeletal muscle, and they are called skeletal muscles because they are attached to the skeletal system, right? Then we're going to have smooth muscles. Smooth muscles are very different from skeletal muscles. They are different in a sense that the cells are spindle shaped cells. They only have one nucleus. And very importantly, they do not have any striations, so they lack striations. Where are you going to find this type of muscle? They're going to be found in the walls of hollow organs such as blood vessels, the digestive tube, the digestive tract, the lymphatic vessels, to name only these organs. Now, the smooth tissues provide involuntary movement. You do not control the contraction of your stomach, for instance. You don't control that. You do not control the contractions that occur in your small intestine or in your large intestine. There is no way you can control that. Finally, the cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle is going to be present in the heart, right? You don't control the contraction of your heart. So this cardiac muscle is going to provide involuntary movement. But what else is characteristic of that cardiac muscle? The cells are going to be made up of one nucleus, right? These cells, however, are going to be branched cells. We are going to see some striations. And in addition to this kind of striation we would see in skeletal muscles, you have some other striations that are very dark, right? And that are thick. These striations right here, these are intercalated discs. Intercalated discs. These intercalated discs are going to be the locations where you are going to find gap junctions. Remember, the gap junctions allow two neighboring cells to communicate directly. And this is what allows the heart to contract like a syncytium as a unit. How about the nervous tissue? First, what is the role of the nervous tissue? The job of the nervous tissue is to allow communication, carry information from one place to another, right? Specifically from a sensory organ that is going to collect the sensory input to a central system where the information is going to be integrated and there is going to be a decision made for a motor output, right? For instance, when you are walking and you step on something that is hard and that causes discomfort, you are going to move your foot up. Now, the reason why you are moving your foot, it's because, first of all, your foot actually detected that there is something underneath of your foot, right? The sensory organs there gather the information it went in the brain. The brain made the decision that this is not something that we should tolerate. We have to move the foot up, right? Now, what are the cells that are responsible for this function? We have two types of cells. We have the neurons and we have the neuroglia. These two types of cells work hand in hand. Now, the neurons are these cells that are going to gather the information, integrate that information, and make a decision. This is the core of the nervous tissue. That's the core of the nervous tissue. Everything else that is part of the nervous tissue is going to work toward allowing these neurons to carry properly their function, right? Neurons are going to have three major parts. We're going to have the dendrites that kind of stick out of the body. Then we have the cell body. That is the central piece right here. And we have the axon that extends out of the body. Now, the job of the dendrites is to receive information and send that information toward the cell body, while the axons are going to carry the information from the cell body to the organs that needs to be stimulated so that there is a response to an input signal that came. Very important to remember the different parts of the neuron and the role of dendrites and axon. I will bug you with that. Now, how about the neuroglia? The neuroglial cells are essential in providing support to neurons and to nourish the neurons. They are providing also protection to the neurons. So there are three kinds of neuroglial cells. We're going to have oligodendrocytes. The oligodendrocytes are very important in repairing the cells that surround the axon. You have this myelin tissue here, okay, with the Schwann cells. This fat tissue is very important for the function of the neuron. Oligodendrocytes are the ones that are responsible for maintaining integrity of that. Two, we are going to have the astrocytes. The astrocytes serve as bridge between the blood vessel, the blood capillary, and the neuron here. So therefore, the astrocytes are going to collect nutrients from the blood, send these nutrients in the neurons so the neurons can be nourished. But also likewise, they are going to collect the waste from the neuron and send that waste in the blood so the waste can be discarded. Finally, but not least, you do have microglia. Microglia are these protective cells that are going to protect the neuron against any foreign attack. For instance, viral infections, bacterial infections. So those microglia are going to engulf anything that can try to come in to cause damages in the neurons. Now, the neuroglia are going to be much more abundant than neurons in the body. You're going to have a ratio to 9 neuroglia for one neuron. About, it's an estimate, right? The next tissue we're going to address is the epithelial tissues. The epithelial tissues are going to be made up of cells that come together in such a tight manner to form a continuous network of cells. This continuous network of cells is going to allow the formation of membranes. These membranes are going to cover structures. Therefore, epithelial tissues are typically found lining body cavities, covering body surfaces, and found making up glands. The cells are going to be typically attached to a structure that we call the basement membrane. That basement membrane is very much at the bottom of the epithelium, while at the top of the epithelium you have an open surface, right? The epithelia are going to be named based on the shape of the cells they are made up of, right? There are, however, some epithelia that do not necessarily obey that shape of the cell for naming. These are transitional epithelia. The transitional epithelia are these epithelia that actually which cells can change their shape based on tension. For instance, the epithelium that is found in the bladder where urine is stored. When the bladder is empty, the cells have a certain shape. When the bladder is full, the cells have a different shape, right? So based on the tension, you're going to have different appearance. So with that said, let's dig some more in epithelial tissues. Now, based on the shape and the number of layers of cells, we are going to have simple epithelia. The simple epithelia are going to be made up of one single layer of cell, and after that layer of cell, we're going to have the basement membrane. This is the basement membrane. Basement membrane. There we go. So that's a simple epithelium because you have one layer of cell. Then we're going to have epithelia that appear stratified, meaning multiple layers of cells, but in reality, they are not made up of multiple layers of cells. It's only an appearance, but it's not real. These are pseudo-stratified epithelia, right? While we do have epithelia that have more than one layer of cell, these are stratified epithelia. Now, based on the shape of the cells, we are going to have cells that are cube-like. These are cuboidal epithelia. They can fit in a cube, so cube-shaped. Then we have columnar epithelia, where the cells are tall. Now here we have cuboidal epithelium. And the basement membrane here. Columnar epithelium, you're going to have tall cells like this. And you're going to have a basement membrane here, okay? And then you're going to have squamous epithelium where the cells are going to be flat. So you're going to have cells like this and have a basement membrane here. All right, so cuboidal epithelium, cube shaped, columnar epithelium, column shaped, and squamous epithelium, flattened cells. So here you have a pseudo columnar epithelium with tall cells here, right? And here. In between, you're going to have this cell here that gives you the impression that you have another layer of cell, but in reality, if we were to follow this cell, we're going to see that it comes all the way up to the top here, but we just don't see it in this way of showing the epithelium. All right, so the simple squamous epithelia, what is an example of organ where we find that epithelium? So the simple squamous epithelium is found in the lungs, in blood vessels. What is their job? Their job is to provide protection. The simple cuboidal epithelia, where would you find them? Example is going to be lining the kidney tubules, and various glands. What is their job? Their job is to absorb molecules. How about the simple columnar epithelium? The simple columnar epithelium, they're going to be typically found lining the small intestine, the oviduct. They're going to be also found lining the large intestine, right? What is their job? Is to absorb nutrients. Then we have the pseudostratified epithelium, and that pseudostratified epithelium, typically it is ciliated, so it has cilia, right? That pseudostratified epithelium is also oftentimes columnar. Where do we find it? We find it lining the trachea or the windpipe, right here. It's going to be there to trap some potential infectious particles and discard them toward the throat so that you can swallow this potentially infectious particles, and they go in the stomach where they get destroyed. Notice that you're going to have some particular cells here. These cells produce the mucus. These are goblet cells. And here also in the columnar epithelium here, you're going to have these goblet cells, which job is to produce the mucus. And then we are going to have an example of stratified epithelium. So here we have the stratified squamous epithelium. That stratified squamous epithelium typically going to be found lining the nose, the mouth, the esophagus, the anal canal, the vagina, and its role is going to be to provide protection, right? Protection of the organ. Now, we looked at the four major types of tissues. Now we are going to take a look at organs and organ systems. So organs are going to be made up of two or more tissues that come together to work toward a particular function, while organ systems are going to be a collection of organs that are working together to carry a particular function. You have, for instance, the nervous system, the digestive system, the circulatory system, the muscular system, you name it. So, what are the different systems in our body? Now, we have a number of systems, 11 of them. We're going to have the integumentary system here. That integumentary system, its job is going to be to provide protection to the body, to allow to maintain an internal balance inside of the body in terms of temperature. The integumentary system is going to synthesize vitamin D, receive sensory inputs. An example of organ in the integumentary system is going to be the skin. How about the cardiovascular system? The cardiovascular system, its job is going to be to transport nutrients and waste. It's going to play a role in maintaining an internal stable temperature, pH, and fluid at balance. An example of organ is the heart, but we also have blood vessels. How about the lymphatic system? The lymphatic system and the immune system, their job is going to be to fight infections and other diseases. It provides homeostasis of fluid, and it's going to be very important in assisting in absorption of some nutrients, including fat. And some organs are going to be the lymphatic vessels, the lymphatic node, and the spleen. How about the digestive system? Its job is going to be to ingest food, digest that food, and process that food. Then nutrients are going to be absorbed. Waste is going to be eliminated. It is also going to be involved in maintaining a fluid balance in the body. As part of the digestive system, we're going to have the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. The respiratory system is going to be very important in exchanging gas between the inside and the outside of the cell. And that gas exchange is going to be essential for pH balance, also going to be essential for obtaining energy, right? Some examples of organ is going to be the lungs, the urinary system. This is going to be a system that is mainly focusing on excreting waste, but also maintain a water-salt balance, right? Examples of organs, the kidney, the urinary bladder. Then we are going to have the skeletal system. The skeletal system is going to provide support. That's why we can hold an upright position. Without the skeletal system, we wouldn't be able to hold that upright position, right? The skeletal system is going to allow us to run, right? Assist in movement. It's going to be the area for storing salts, including calcium and phosphate and magnesium and many other salts, right? It's going to also be the place where blood cells are going to originate, right? Example of organs are the bones. The muscular system, very important for posture and movement and production of heat. We have the muscles as the organ. The nervous system, the job is going to be to receive information, process that information, and store the sensory inputs and make a decision for all this input, right? They're going to play a role in coordinating how different organs in the body are functioning, right? So we're going to have the brain and the spinal cord. And finally, we have the endocrine system and the reproductive system. The endocrine system is going to be essential for production of hormones. They're going to be, just like the nervous system, essential in coordinating the functioning of different organ systems, essential for controlling metabolism and response to stresses. They're going to be involved in water salt balance. Some organs are going to be the testes, ovaries, adrenal glands, pancreas, thyroid, thymus, thyroid, pineal gland. You're also going to have the hypothalamus, just to name these organs. And then you are going to have the reproductive system, which job is going to be to produce reproductive cells, but also to transport gametes, preserve these gametes too, produce and protect, right? Transport gametes, nurture and give birth for female. Some examples of organ: testes, penis, ovaries, uterus, vagina, just to name those. Now, how are all these organs working together? Now, between you and I'm not going to go into the intricacies of how all the organs are working together. What I would like you to know is that on this slide, you can actually see how many organs are working together to maintain a well-functioning body. Now, all these organs are working together to actually maintain a stable environment, homeostasis. Now, how does homeostasis work in our system? Homeostasis is going to be the mean by which the body controls its activity, right? Maintaining a relatively stable internal environment in terms of temperature, in terms of pH, in terms of water salt balance, in terms of sugar amount, right? So homeostasis, it's that process in our body that allows us to maintain a relatively stable environment. This is going to involve both the nervous system and the endocrine system to maintain that relatively stable internal environment. Any drastic change is necessarily going to cause you to feel like you are sick, right? Any drastic change, it's going to cause you to be sick, regardless of the kind of drastic change this is. Now, we are able to maintain a relatively internal stable environment by two major mechanisms. The first mechanism is the negative feedback. The negative feedback, it's when the result of a stimulus is causing the shutdown of the response. All right? While a positive feedback, it's going to be a mechanism by which the product of the response to a stimulus is going to trigger even more response to that initial stimulus, right? I'm going to give you some specific examples as we go. So typically, in a negative feedback, you are going to have the negative feedback that is actually the primary mechanism by which homeostasis is maintained in our body. That is the most common mechanism that is used in maintaining a relatively stable balance in our body. So here we are going to have an initial stimulus. That initial stimulus can be, for instance, temperature change. It can be a pH change. Now, for us to respond to that stimulus, you need sensors, right? And that sensor is the one that is going to collect the information, send that information in a central system that is going to assess the information that comes in, and a decision is going to be made. So typically, to maintain homeostasis, say you have too much of something, maybe a high temperature, maybe a high pH. The high temperature and the high pH is going to constitute the stimulus. That stimulus is going to be detected by a sensory organ. That sensory organ is going to send the information in the control center. The control center integrates the information, makes a decision, and that decision is sent to the effector organs. That effector organ is going to develop a response. That response is going to cause the too much to be the set level, right? Once the response reaches the set level, then you have the system that is shut down so that we reach homeostasis, right? Likewise, if there is too little, this is going to trigger another cascade of events so that you can reach homeostasis. So that's negative feedback, all right? Now, example of negative feedback, it's body temperature. Right now, it is cold outside. If you go outside without your jacket, right now, it is going to be too cold so that your body temperature will go down. Your normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. If you step out right now without a jacket, your body temperature is going to go below 37 degrees Celsius. Now, that low temperature will constitute a stimulus, and the receptors in your skin are the one that sends all of that. So they gather the information, they send that information in the brain. In the brain, that information is going to be treated, and a decision is going to be made that, ooh, it is cold, we need to do something. So the information is going to be sent to the effector organ. In this case, we have the skin, right? In the skin, what is going to happen? We're going to see the blood vessels in the skin are going to experience what we call vasoconstriction. That vasoconstriction is going to cause a friction of the blood on the walls of blood vessel, which is going to produce heat, right? The sweat glands are going to be inactivated, and you will start shivering. And that shivering, it's basically a contraction, continual contraction of muscles that is going to actually produce heat, right? And all of this is going to stop when the body temperature reaches the normal body temperature, which is 37 degrees Celsius. All right? Now, in the summertime, when it's too hot, Likewise, the sensory receptor in your skin are going to feel that, oh, it is too hot, right? So the stimulus is going to go in the brain, and there a decision is going to be made that it's too hot, and signal is going to be sent in effector organs, in here the skin. As effect, what are we going to see? The blood vessels are going to dilate. So we have vasodilation. The sweat glands are going to be activated, and therefore they're going to release water. And by releasing water, we're going to have a film of water on our skin, which is going to be enough to keep our body cool, right? And when our body reaches 37 degrees Celsius, then we don't have any more that response. No more vasodilation, no more activation of sweat glands. That's, again, is an example of negative feedback. Now, how about positive feedback? Positive feedback is actually less common in our body than negative feedback. Now, positive feedback, a good example, it's basically when a lady is giving birth. When a lady is giving birth, you have the release of a hormone that is called oxytocin. Oxytocin is released because when a lady is ready to give birth, the baby, the fetus, that is the future baby, is going to be upside down. By being upside down, the baby is going to press their head against the cortex of the reproductive organs, so that the pressure is going to trigger the body to release oxytocin. That pressure that caused the body to release oxytocin, now oxytocin is going to circulate in the blood and cause the contraction of the uterus. By causing a contraction of the uterus, this is going to cause the baby to go even further down on the cervix. I said the cortex, no, it's the cervix. I'm sorry, the cervix. So on the cervix, so the head of the baby is going to apply more pressure on the cervix, and by applying more pressure, this is going to cause more release of the oxytocin. With more release of the oxytocin, there is going to be more contraction. And that process is going to go on and on until the cervix is going to open progressively, and the whole process, the whole oxytocin is production is going to stop when actually the baby is out, because at that point there is no more pressure, right? So again, release of oxytocin is going to cause contraction of the uterus. Contraction of the uterus is going to cause more pressure of the head of the baby on the cervix, and more pressure is going to cause more release of the oxytocin, and this is how the baby is going to come out. Another example of positive feedback, it's actually when we have fever. When we have fever, we tend to have more fever, which actually is a bad news. All right. So these are some examples of positive feedback. And again, negative feedback is the most common mechanism of homeostasis in our system. Now, let's take a look at the integumentary system. Here we're going to take a look at different organs, and then we are going to take a look at cancer of the skin. The integumentary system, it's actually the skin and bunch of accessory organs, including the hair, nails, and glands. The skin is going to have two major regions. We're going to have the epidermis and the dermis. Underneath of the skin, we are going to have the subcutaneous layer where you're going to have storage of the fat tissue, right? The fat cells. And the skin is going to be very important in homeostasis, including maintaining an internal temperature that is set at 37 degrees Celsius, preventing loss of water, right? That plays a role in maintaining a proper amount of water in the body. Now, the integumentary system provides protection. Okay? Protection from what? From infectious particles, such as bacteria, viruses. It's going to be very important for protecting us from physical trauma, right? And water loss. It helps regulate temperature. I already said that. It allows us to be aware of our surrounding via sensory receptors. The integumentary system is also the region where vitamin D is produced. Now, vitamin D is very important in the absorption of calcium, right? And calcium plays a very important role in the structure of the bones, right? But also in muscle contraction and so many other aspects of our health. Now, the body is also going to produce melanin. The integumentary system, I'm sorry, is also going to produce melanin. But what is melanin for? Melanin plays a very important role in many aspects of our lives, including obviously protecting us against UV light, which can be damaging and cause cancers. So here we have the two regions of the skin. We're going to have the epidermis right here, and we're going to have the dermis. The epidermis, you can see it's much thinner compared to the dermis that is very thick, right? You're going to notice that the epidermis does not contain blood vessels. The epidermis does not contain blood vessel. The epidermis has a layer here of flattened cells. So it is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. Underneath, you're going to have all other skin cells. So the skin cells, as they go from close to the dermis to going up toward the surface, they become more and more flat. The outermost layer of the epidermis, it's a layer of cell that actually contains a lot of keratin. And that keratin is responsible for the waterproofing of the skin. Now, let me move on because I can spend forever. I can spend too much time here. You're going to notice that in the dermis, this is where you're going to have blood vessels. You're going to have the sensory, the sensory tissues, right? You have some sensory organs here. You are going to have also, what else are you going to have here? You're going to have the sweat glands that are embedded in the dermis, in spite of the fact that they are extension of the epidermis, right? You're also going to have the sebaceous glands or oil glands that are also embedded in the dermis while they are part of the epidermis, right? They are extension of the epidermis. You're going to have some muscles in the dermis here. These muscles are responsible for the goosebumps, right? These are arrector pili muscles. Arrector pili muscles. You are going to have, I told you about the sebaceous glands or oil glands, the sensory receptors are going to be there. What else? I did tell you about sweat glands, arteries and veins, nervous tissue. Underneath, so the subcutaneous layer is going to be made up of adipose tissue. Okay. So again, the epidermis here, it is thin, is the outermost layer, right? Made up of epithelial tissues, stratified squamous epithelium, right? This epithelium is going to be waterproof because it contains a bunch of keratin, right? Keratins are proteins. Now, in the epidermis, we're going to have some cells that are very important for protecting you against infection. These are the Langerhans cells. These are white blood cells, which job is going to be to engulf pathogens and get rid of them. You're going to have melanocytes. Melanocytes produce melanin, right? And they produce melanin, which protect us against UV light. Okay. Now, our cells in the epidermis are going to be able to convert cholesterol into vitamin D, which again is essential for the absorption of calcium. The dermis is thick, it's more inside, right? Made up of fibrous connective tissue, okay? Fibrous connective tissue, contains elastic fibers and collagen fibers. You're going to find there blood vessels, we saw that, many sensory organs, receptors, and glands. Here we have a cross section of the skin with the stratified squamous epithelium. Here we're going to have a hair follicle that comes from here. This is the dermis here. What else do I need to show you? So these are cells that actually are undergoing keratinization, right? And you can see the cells are relatively dark because they contain melanosomes, which are the little sacs that contain melanin. So now we looked at the integumentary system. Now let's take a look at some defects that can occur in the integumentary system. You have some cancer that can develop from our skin. There are two major types of cancers I'm going to address here. One is the basal cell carcinoma. The basal cell carcinoma is going to affect the outermost layer of our skin, right? It is the most common, but fortunately, it is the least deadly of the skin cancers. While the melanoma that happens a little deeper in the epidermis is going to be the most deadly, but the least common, fortunately. Now, the melanoma are going to be much darker in appearance compared to the carcinoma. And the reason why the melanoma are going to be darker, it's because of the melanocytes that are going to undergo uncontrolled cell division, right? And you have that bunch of melanin that is produced. That's why it looks dark, okay? So what can you do to prevent development of skin cancer? This is not absolute, obviously. These are just some recommendation, right? Stay away from purposeful exposure to the sun. When I say purposeful exposure to the sun, it's, for instance, when we go out and we lay out on the sun for hours, right? For the sake of having, that nice dark shade of our skin, right? The reason it's because by allowing yourself purposefully to lay down on the sun, you are receiving a harmful amount of UV light. That harmful amount of UV light eventually is going to cause an amount of DNA damage in skin cells that cannot always be repaired. And because of that, there is a chance of development of cancer. Wear protective clothing, right? Use sunscreen, right? That sunscreen is typically going to protect you against UVA. That is actually accelerating aging of our skin and causing wrinkles to develop on our skin. And UVBs are going to be more damaging to the skin by actually causing our DNA cells, our DNA in the skin cells to be damaged. Well, if you ask me, I would tell you, do not use tanning beds, because this is really one of the purposeful ways of exposing ourselves to damages that is not necessary. Now, obviously, when you go to a spa, you're going to be told, okay, well, you are fine for this dose of UV light, okay, but know that the guy has to sell his product, right? He's selling service. So he's not going to tell you that you are at risk at this dose. And even then, when you consider the studies that are done, the study that are done are not done on everyone. So what is deemed safe for Mrs. X is not safe for Mrs. Y. That is very important to know and understand. All right. So, but that's just my opinion. So here you have a picture of the basal cell carcinoma. That is the most superficial type of skin cancer. And then we have the melanoma. That is the deeper side of skin cancer. And you see that the melanoma is more raised. The reason why it is more raised is because the melanoma is much thicker. And this melanoma actually have the capability to have skin cells that are cancer cells to go in circulation, because the melanocytes are much closer to blood cells than the superficial cells in this type of cancer here are from the blood cells. So therefore, these cells right here are have a much easier opportunity to go in circulation, and therefore becoming a major issue than the basal cell carcinoma. Finally, we do have the accessory organs of the integumentary system. Now, we're going to have as accessory organs the nails, the hair, and the glands. The nails are going to be some extension of the epidermis. Okay, they are also going to offer protection to your fingers, right, and your toes. The hair follicles. The hair follicles are derived from the dermis, but the hair is going to grow from dermal cells. The oil glands are some extension of the epidermis while they are going to be embedded in the dermis, right? So the oil glands are going to produce sebum. That sebum is going to be very important to protect your skin, and prevent infections on your skin, right? It's going to inhibit the growth of bacteria on your skin. The sweat glands are also extension of the epidermis that go all the way inside of the dermis, and they're going to play a very important role in modulating body temperature, right? So this is about what we are going to say in this chapter. Thank you for your attention. I will talk to you in the next chapter.